Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Over Explained, and today we are talking about how to assess the strength of your builds. To do this, we're going to talk about a couple different things here. One is give you some important overview of information that's pretty relevant to the game and how we're going to be conducting our assessments. Then we're going to get into 3 methods to determine the actual strength of your builds. We're then going to talk about what to do when you're strong, what to do when you're weak, and then we'll wrap it all up with some examples. But first, who am I? I am the Bazaar Whisperer. I hit Legend in every season of the Bazaar. I have about a 40 to 50% 10 win conversion rate, so get about a 10 win every 40-50% of my runs. And yeah, been playing the game for a while here, got hundreds of hours on it, and I'm excited to share my knowledge with you. But let's get into some information here. So, I'm going to talk about the different phases of the game so we have a knowledge base about what I'm talking about later in this video. What I consider the early game is the first 1 through 3 days of the game. This is before you have a full board. It's before your build is online. Then we transition into the mid game, which is day 4 through 9. This is where we have an established direction, a synergy, or a build that we're going to be looking to go for. And we're primarily playing off silver tier items. We may have a couple bronze, we may have 1 or 2 gold tier items, but this is kind of the bread and butter of where a lot of your runs are going to come together and formulate into your grand plan. And then what we're playing for is that 10 to 14 days, that late game. And this is primarily after you get your level 10 enchant. So if you didn't know, level 10, you are always going to get an enchantment on that you can put on any one of your items. And with that, that's going to be a huge power spike for you, generally speaking. And this is where most runs will ideally end, in that kind of like 10 to 13, 10 to 14 area. If you're going past that, you probably had a pretty rough road getting there, and the builds that you're going to be going up against are pretty insane. So you ideally want to end your runs at least in that like 10 to 13 day mark. And some more general information. So you and your opponents are going to be at least +1 level compared to the day of the game. That's kind of like the ideal scenario. If you are, let's say on day 5, you are level 5 or level 4, you're a little under leveled. You want to be kind of getting that advantage, gaining a little bit extra XP each day. You want to, at least in the early portions of the mid game, be getting at least 1 level per day so that you can ideally get your level 10 enchant on day 8 and sometimes even day 7 if you found a lot of XP to do so. But with that, you're also going to be gaining max HP whenever you level. And how this works is a weird system of scaling. Well, I say weird, it's just how I have it laid out here is pretty weird. It's actually very straightforward. So you're going to gain 50 max health times your level minus 50 max HP per level. So basically this means that at level 5, you will gain 200 max HP. So if we plug that in, 50 times 5 is 250 minus 50 for max HP per level. So that's one way to calculate it. And why don't we just look at what those look like for each day? So if we see, this is a chart here that will track essentially the total max HP that a player is going to have at any given level if they haven't taken any chocolates or any other way to modify their max HP. So we can see most, if not actually all heroes now start at 258 max HP. You know, I think a pig might actually start at 300, so I take that back. Regardless, you're going to gain 50 max HP, and then 100, 150, 200, depending on the level it is. There is something in the game where if you hover over your portrait, it will tell you with a little indication that you will gain 100 max HP whenever you level up. That's not accurate. This is actually how it's going to work out for you. So we can see that these are the breakpoints for the max HP at the different levels that you're at. And I'll leave this down in the comments for you guys to actually take this and make your own Google spreadsheet out of it if you would like. So just some good information for us to know. So the other big piece to know here is that most items played in the early to mid game have a 5 to 7 second base cooldown. So most of the items that you're going to be getting in the Bazaar that you're actually going to be playing on your board have, again, that 5 to 7 second base cooldown. That's kind of our breakpoints that we're going to be looking at. So you can think about it at the 5 to 7 second mark. That's going to be the first volley of items going off from us or our opponents, and then subsequently every 5 to 7 seconds, that's where we're going to see the other items go off. Cooldown is really important in the Bazaar. We're generally trying to get ourselves to have our items going off faster than our opponent. So if we know the timings of when their items are going off, we can kind of gauge how strong we are and potentially how fast we're going to win, knowing that our items are going to be going off potentially before our opponents. But let's talk about the actual strength assessment methods that I utilize. I actually utilize all three of these in my games, and I'll get into the nitty gritty of what each of those is. But the first is win speed. This is really assessing how fast you are winning compared to those breakpoints. So if we're winning before 5 to 7 seconds, if we're winning after that, that'll determine our strength, and I'll break down what that strength means. Then we look at the monster test. This is pretty straightforward. It's basically seeing if we can defeat the strongest monster for that day. That'll give us a little bit of an indication of where we are for our strength. And then we can actually go into and calculate our DPS with the DPS calculator that I have a wonderful link for from a Reddit user. And I'll shout out them and give you the links to all that in the description below. But yeah, I utilize a combination of all three of these things to know how strong my build is at any given time. So let's talk about the first method. This is kind of the bread and butter, the one that I'm normally utilizing. It's win speed. It's determining how strong you are compared to your opponents and how fast you are killing them. Mind you, this is not so easy to equate when we're talking about defensive builds. So this is primarily when we're talking about offensive or proactive damage-based builds. That's where this is going to come into play. We'll talk a little bit more about defense in a minute, but getting into it, if we can win in under 5 seconds, that's basically we're going and winning before our opponent gets any of their items off. We know that we're in a pretty strong place. It means that we're very strong. We can understand that if we have any of our items go off, and rather if we defeat them before any of their items go off, that's a pretty great place to be. That's where we're generally trying to get at in the late game. We know our build is strong when we can win in under 10 to 12 seconds. So basically we're winning before our opponent's second volley of their items, or we're winning just at that second volley of our own items. If we can do this, and again, our items go off twice, we know we're in a pretty strong position. I would say we're kind of like mid or medium power level when we can win in about 20 seconds. So this is by that third or fourth volley of our items going off. This is where a lot of builds are going to end up. We're primarily, again, trying to make sure that we're very strong or strong, but when we're in that midpoint, that's a good indicator for us to know that we need to get stronger. Additionally, we can talk about being weak and very weak. So if we're weak, this is we can win just before or at the sandstorm. All our items are going off. Maybe we need a little bit more damage in the sandstorm to get us across the finish line. We can still win, but it's very unlikely. This is where we know we really need to make a change to our build. We also know we're very weak, pretty self-explanatory. You can't win at all. You are maybe only winning in the sandstorm, if at all, or it's kind of like a crapshoot if you're actually going to be winning in the sandstorm. This is not where we want to be. If we don't have enough damage based off our opponent's actual total HP that we've looked at before to actually win the game, then we really are in a bad position and need to find a way to make our build much stronger. So let's talk about defenses for a second. So the win speed method doesn't really equate super well to defensive builds. With your defensive builds, you need to scale your shields, your regen ahead of your opponent's normal breakpoints, and then you're always trying to win through the sandstorm. Maybe you have something on board like a kukri that is scaling you damage based off your healing and things of this nature. Yes, that's kind of a way to look at this, and if you have a kukri that's going to be scaling and killing your opponents within 5 seconds, you obviously have something going on that's very, very strong. But what I'm really talking about here is builds that have 0 damage on the board. So we can think about a purely defensive build, or ones that are doing just barely any damage. It's not a primary win con. The thing about this is that if we think about healing, yes, we can have an item that is healing for 50 healing points. However, if we're at 250 max HP and our opponent hasn't actually damaged us at all, if we heal for 50, we haven't really done anything proactive. We have actually healed for nothing because we had no damage on us to begin with. So those cooldowns are very important. If we are in a healing build, we really need to be at a point where we are having as low cooldowns as possible for our healing items so that we can mitigate a lot of that loss that would be coming from our heal times not aligning well with when our opponents are going off. Another way to think about it is that if we are in a position where we are trying to win through defenses, we need to have more max HP than our opponent when we get to the sandstorm. So it's not enough to just be keeping up with them one-on-one or one for one. If we're getting down and we're like living and stabilizing at 50 max HP while they still have 750, well, we're going to lose in the sandstorm. So we need to find a way to at least, I would say a good benchmark is doing at least 1.5 or 2 times the amount of damage that your opponent is doing in healing. So we were trying to out heal them basically 2 to 1. And this, again, is through either regen, healing, and shields is primarily the easiest way to try and calculate this. But again, the wind speed, not a super effective model when trying to determine the strength of your defense build. But I would say if you are, try and look at the breakpoints of the max HP that, again, we saw before. And then think about if you're facing an opponent, they might be doing 750 damage at the 10-second mark. Well, if we can do 1500 healing by that point, we're in a pretty strong position. But let's keep going. So the second method I utilize here is the monster test. And this is a pretty simple one here, as I love my green friend on the screen who is dancing for their life here. Can you defeat the strongest PvE monster for that day? If you can, yes, you're strong. If you can't, you're not strong. Pretty self-explanatory. But we're going to get a little bit more into it and actually go by monster, and I'll give you all the details on which monsters are strong in the game, which ones are weak, and which ones are kind of mid. Because if we're looking at the mid game specifically, this benchmark test kind of falls off a little bit, so we have to know which monsters actually are strong and which ones are not. This was a really hard thing for me when I was first starting to play the game because I just didn't know how the monsters really even worked. So we can look at resources like howbazaar.gg, which I have pulled up here in front of us, and we can look at every single monster that is going to be on every single day, and we can also click into them. We can see all the weapons and items that they have. We can look to see how much HP they have. This is a wonderful resource. Again, if you don't know howbazaar.gg, pretty awesome place to look at monsters, skills, items, pretty much anything that is related to the actual stats of the Bazaar. I check this reference literally every single run. So I'll link that down in the description for you guys to utilize as well. But let's do our own assessment here and talk about monsters by strength with each day. So I'm going to show you each of the strongest monsters that you can fight. So it's the ones that are going to be on the right-hand side of your screen. These are the strongest monsters that you can fight. They're not always the same, so we can have different monsters show up for that day. And I'm going to go through each one and tell you how strong they are in relation to the rest of them. So on day one, the Viper is the strongest monster that you can fight. This one's kind of inconsequential just because your build's probably not going to be online, but just know that the monster, the Viper rather, can kill you. The Haunted Kimono can also show up as being one of the strongest monsters. It's not that strong. You can probably defeat it. When we get to day two is pretty interesting though. This is a good breakpoint to know if your build is strong or not, because the Warrior specifically is very strong. Compared to the monster that was in its place before, the Junkyard Scrapper, this one is a lot stronger than that. It can do a lot of damage, and if you don't have the ability to be proactive in this fight, you're probably not going to win. So if you can beat the Warrior, you're in a pretty strong place on day two. Moving to day three, we talk about the Hoverbike Hooligan and the Eccentric Aetheryte. So the Hoverbike Hooligan is pretty strong just because they can do a high amount of damage to you. If you have any healing or shielding, you can make up for a lot of that, and they will eventually run out of ammunition on their items, so you can pretty easily out heal this fight. But if you can defeat this fight, you're in a pretty strong place. The Eccentric Aetheryte, not that strong to be frank with you. You're going to want to have at least some damage to fight back against them, and if you have at least some damage, you are probably going to win just because the amount of damage that they do scales off their shields, but if you can mitigate that, you'll be in a pretty good place. And I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you here, but I will also link below this spreadsheet that you can copy and utilize for yourselves to get a good glimpse and an easy glimpse, and you can sort it however you want once you download it. So that you can see all of this information. I'm still going to go ahead and talk through all these different points here, but just wanted to make sure that it's not like when you're in a university where you're just like frantically trying to scribble down these notes like, oh my god, I'm never going to see this again. No, I have this for you. You can just bookmark it and you'll be good to go. So going back to, again, monster strength here, and these are the strongest ones each day. There are a total of, I believe, 38 different monsters that you can fight in the strongest category in each of that, again, right-hand side. I will try and go quickly and not go too in-depth on each of them, but you know me, I gotta over-explain. This is the Bazaar over-explain. So, day 4 here, we have the Flame Juggler. They do an incredibly large amount of fire damage, so if we can defeat them, or if we have healing, we're in a pretty good spot. If we see something where it says like very strong or strong, that's generally based off of like if you have a build that directly counters what they're trying to do. So if you have a lot of healing against the Flame Juggler, well, yeah, you're kind of in a strong point, but really it's your build that countered them. So it's hard to assess. And then we go to something like a Hexa, which frankly, it's very situational and they're not very strong even when you have the right items to defeat them. If you have a bunch of small items, a Hexa will probably beat you. If not, you'll be able to beat them. Hellbilly, not that strong overall. Prince Marianus over here is super strong, so I would say if you can defeat Prince Marianus, you're in a pretty strong point. Not very strong, you're not like top tier, but you're still on track to being in a good place when it comes to your PvP fights. Moving to day 5, we have the Mod Squad. So frankly, they're not that strong. They could probably bump this down to the mid sort of strength level. So if you can defeat them, your build is maybe of like a medium power level at best, or at worst, I should say. Then we move to the Gorgon Noble. The Gorgon Noble does have a lot of poisoning, which can be tough for some builds, but realistically, they're not that strong either. Then we go to Trash Town Mayor. Despite the buffs on the Trash Town Mayor, they're still pretty mid. They're not that strong. However, if we see Scoville, man, I've died so many times to Scoville where I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally defeat Scoville. No, I can't. Scoville is very strong. If you can defeat Scoville, you're in a pretty good spot with your build. Moving to day 6, we look at the Enclave Weeper, who, again, is more powerful than they look, but frankly not that powerful. Going to the Lone Shark, they actually put out a lot of damage, way more than you might think. The fights that I have with the Lone Shark, I feel so confident going into it. I'm like, oh man, I only live with like 50 or 100 HP. Not a lot. But it's really these two fights that will be the bigger ones for you to know the true test of your build strength. If you are able to defeat the Infernal, your build is either strong or very strong. That means that you probably were able to beat them before their second volley of items, just because by the time that they actually get their big giant flame sword to hit you for that second or third time, you're going to die very quickly. So your build is probably on track to win at that like 12 to 15 second mark. Regardless, moving forward here, if you can defeat the Lich, your build is very, very strong. Lich is probably one of the hardest monsters in the entire game to beat, just because on day 6, you probably don't have the resources to contend with them. So if you can defeat them on day 6, your build's in a pretty good spot. Moving to day 7 here pretty quickly. So Shock Trooper, mid to strong, not like the strongest thing, but if your build is very slow, they can scale a huge, huge plasma rifle and just shoot you out of the sky. If we're looking at Chili Charles here, not that strong. It's kind of like a damage check. They are going to be doing a lot of freezing. If your items are pretty slow, maybe you can't beat them, but they have no offensive capability. So Chili Charles is a pretty easy fight. Radiant Corsair got buffed recently, so they're doing a lot more slow. I say it's a buff. You might think it's a nerf, but I think the dock lines basically having the DPS of like 2 or 3 of your items is pretty insane. So if you can defeat the Radiant Corsair with all their HP, you're in a pretty good spot. Same thing with the Ghost Pepper here. They're very strong. If you can defeat them, you're pretty strong. If you have a way to mitigate the burn damage, then, you know, maybe your build's like more strong than it is very strong. And again, this is all related to the wind speed that we looked at earlier. Day 8, all these fights here, whether it's Dr. Vortex, Wandering Shoal, Burninator Bot, and I'll be honest, even the Oasis Guardian are not that strong. They're pretty mid, so not a good way to judge your build strength. But if you are able to defeat the dragon, they are really strong. So you're in a pretty good spot if you can defeat them. Day 9 here, we have, looking at this different monsters here, the weapons platform. It can do a lot more damage than it looks like. So I would say that if you don't think your build is strong enough, well, weapons platform might just kill you. But they're not too bad. Enclave Revenant is again into that mid to strong tier. However, if you can defeat the Death Knight Reaper, you're very strong, or you're cut that like the threshold of being strong. Death Knight Reaper has a ton of life, a ton of ways to heal, and generally at day 9, this can be a pretty tough fight if you're not prepared. Pharaoh Khan also, if you defeat them, you're in that strong tier just because, well, with a lot of where your max HP is generally going to be in this game is in the territory where Pharaoh Khan can just one-shot you. So if you can defeat them, you're in a pretty good spot. And then lastly, we're looking at day 10 here. So there are a total of, I believe, 8 different monsters on day 10. Whether you're facing the Volkos Enforcer or you're facing something like the Void Golem, all these fights are pretty difficult. But the thing is, you're not going to be facing any stronger iterations of these enemies. So if we're thinking about it, if you can defeat these on day 10, any one of these, like let's just, again, take the Volkos Enforcer here. If you can defeat them on day 10, you are very strong. But if you are able to defeat them on day 15, well, you had 5 more days to kind of figure out your build. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are like super, super powerful. Regardless, the Volkos Enforcer here, again, in that strong to very strong tier. Same with the Frost Street Champion, very strong to strong tier. The Void Golem, I would say, is in this very strong tier just because they are able to counter a lot of their builds with the call drops that they have. They are going to be dealing damage to you, I believe, like generally about if they don't destroy their other items, or if they don't destroy one of their 2 call drops, they'll be doing like 400 damage to you every time your items go off. So it's a lot of damage. Veteran Octopus, not that strong, frankly. Awakened District, another one of these damage check bosses here where if you don't go and kill them before, I believe, the 12-second mark, you're probably just going to get one-shotted. Lord Arkan has been buffed, but they are still not the strongest out of these 8. If you can defeat them, you're kind of in that stronger tier. And this is actually a pretty good one to know. If you can defeat Lord Arkan, they have a lot of really, really, really good items. So it's worth taking a chance on trying to defeat him. Then we have the Void Colossus over here. Kind of mid to strong. They don't really have a lot of proactive ways to deal damage to you. So if you can defeat them, and even if they destroy like 1 item on your board, you can probably defeat them. And then Property Baron is in that strong to very strong tier just because they can probably one-shot you at level 10. Regardless, if you're like at level, let's say 12 or 13, you're probably not going to get one-shot by their build, but it could still be a difficult fight. So again, I have that spreadsheet with all this information. So just giving you kind of like a quick overview and my reasoning for each of these. The next one here I want to talk about is the DPS calculator. This is pretty much exactly as it sounds here. We're going to be calculating the DPS of our builds. So how we do this is, one, we can just do it kind of primarily on our board through a DPS calculator, which I'll show you in a second. And then we're comparing this to what we think the max HP of our opponents is going to be. And again, we can think about our level or the day that it's going to be times that 50 max HP plus 200 to 250 depending on where they're at in that day. Or in which character they are. So we kind of have like a rough estimate of where we think a person's max HP is going to be at any given day. And then with that, we can understand, okay, how fast or how much damage do I need to be to do, again, like 750 damage to our opponent? Well, if we can do it in under 5 seconds after we calculated our DPS, we know that we're in a pretty strong spot. So I actually got this DPS calculator that I'm about to show you from this user RoboFRaptor. I don't know them. I haven't reached out to them or anything of this nature. I just saw this post and I thought it was awesome. So in the Bazaar Reddit, I'll link both this post and I'll within it. You know what? I'm just going to link the post in here so that you can both check out what they say here, give them their due diligence, and then you can directly go to the calculator in this link. And all that, again, will be linked below in this video. And with it, once you click into this calculator, you'll have access to a DPS calculator. So this is going to be in Google Sheets. If you do not have Google Sheets, it is free, but this is just where this is housed. So it's a pretty, really awesome resource, I will say. It's one that has helped me out a lot, especially when calculating burn damage. And basically, we're plugging manually in our items. I know this is, frankly, it's tedious, and I'm just going to be honest, not one that I do a lot, but it is one that I will utilize if I am trying to face a monster that I don't know if I can defeat. So that's when I go to the DPS calculator. Again, you don't always need to utilize this, but I've plugged in the stats of, this is a bronze katana, and it will show you, let's see, with like a 1% crit multiplier. Let's just bump that up to, like, let's say we have a pet rock on board or something like that. We have a 15 crit chance here. So then it will take all this into account. And again, the Reddit post will show you more how to utilize this, but it'll show you the total damage that you do at that 30-second mark. The 30-second mark is where the sandstorm comes into play. And then it'll give you the average DPS over those 30 seconds. So this will be like, again, per 1 second, you will deal this much damage. And then your total values will be here at the bottom. So really cool and interesting resource. I highly recommend checking out the Reddit post that actually goes into how to utilize this, but we can plug in all the numbers if we really want to. Again, it's not one that you are probably going to be utilizing in a lot of your runs just because it is rather tedious. However, it is one that'll give you a much more accurate representation of where your board is at. And again, if we look at like where we expect our opponents to be at their different levels, depending on what day it is, then we can have a pretty good gauge of like how strong we are with that. Again, if we're looking at our breakpoints, we'll apply that wind speed breakpoint strength. And so at the 5-second mark, if we can do all of our opponents' max HP that we think they're going to have in or under 5 seconds, we're very strong. In that 10 to 12-second mark, we are pretty strong, or we'll just say we are strong, rather. Let me stick to the verbiage. And then if we are doing it in 20 seconds or less, we're in that middle category. So really, it's, again, utilizing speed. I think that this has been the biggest predictor for me with my games. If I can understand that I am going to be able to defeat my opponents in these brackets, this genuinely has given me like a really good understanding of if my build is strong or not. So I'd say you don't have to do the whole DPS calculator. It is useful every once in a while, just to, if you also are like really unsure of where you're at, it's a nice little way to figure out where your board is at, or again, if you're trying to defeat a monster. But yeah, this really kind of comes back down to the wind speeds. I've seen other methods where people are talking about like more broad topics. They're asking if you're proactive, if you have the means to deal like X amount of damage. Less of them are really getting into like the mathematics of it. And I would say that if you're looking for like a genuine, like a more mathematical way of approaching the game, then I would say looking at the breakpoints, the timings of when items are going to be going off and how fast you can defeat your opponents with those timings in mind is really a much better and more effective method personally than kind of like broadly trying to assess how strong you are. So what now? We've talked about all these different assessment methods. We've kind of talked about the bricks and the bones of it to see, okay, we know that we're kind of strong right now, or we know we're really weak. What do we do with that information? Well, I think about it in two ways. One is when we are strong, and one is when we are weak. So let's talk about what we do when we're strong. So when we're strong, I highly recommend, again, everyone has a different playstyle. This is what I do. You build your lead. You get your economy items. You're in a position where you're building the bank. You're having the opportunity to get more and more money. You know that you're probably going to be winning your PvP fights, so then you can switch gears a little bit and try and accrue more value so that you can more aggressively search for upgrades and synergy items. You're not just kind of like buying things willy-nilly. You're really trying to say, okay, I've targeted a build. This is what I want to go do. Or you have scaling items on your board, something like a Regal Blade that you are trying to buff up. So you need economy to do all of these things. So if you're winning, share up your economy. And then once your economy is shared up, then you can look for that impactful item or impactful events that can give you like cooldown reduction, positive modifier, synergy skills, or the items that you're really highly searching for. And I'll give some examples for us here in a minute. But this is all so that we can prepare for the late game. So again, if we're looking at that before the day 10 mark, or rather the level 10 mark, we are kind of putting ourselves into a specific build. We know what items we're trying to get, but once we get to that level 10 mark, that's where we get our level 10 enchantment that can completely change the game. Level 10 enchantment is the biggest power spike in the entire game, and it could go from making your run unplayable to giving you one of the most powerful runs in the game. So the level 10 enchant is the late game. It's what we're preparing for. And again, we're trying to win along the way to do that. But if we can get to the point where we have like, let's say 8 wins under our belt, then our level 10 enchant doesn't need to be as powerful or synergistic with our board. We can just put that on our strongest item, identify what that is, and try and cross that finish line, get that 10 win in 2 days. That's the ideal scenario. How it actually plays out, basic is different from run to run. The other thing here is that, once we have that economy, and I've talked about it here a little bit, we want to really aggressively prioritize finding powerful items in the later portions of the mid game. So what I would say is there's kind of like a push and pull of the economy here. You're going to bank up a lot of money and then you're going to spend it. You're going to bank up a lot of money and then you're going to spend it. And when we're spending our money, that's when we really want to make sure that we're spending it on the right items, which will be a different video in its own right. I won't tell you all about that now, but we want to make sure that we're spending it on the right items so that when we don't have money, we aren't trying to still search for power and not able to afford the items that could make our board better. So we have to be smart about our purchases and make sure that they are the right items for the direction that we're going. And basically this is to say that we're transitioning into a more powerful build. Not all builds you'll need to transition out of from the mid game to the late game, but a lot of builds in the Bazaar, frankly, are not powerful enough to get you to that 10 wins into the late game, so you're going to need to find something more powerful. If you have a really strong tempo run like weapons Vanessa or small weapons on Pygmalion, you may not even need to consider going and trying to transition. You'll just be saying like, okay, I know that I probably lose on day 13, but up until day 12, I'm good. And thus you're just trying to make as many small marginal changes and powerful, I would say like small powerful upgrades to your board as you can, knowing that, yeah, you're probably not going to win in the late game. But let's look at some examples. So I want to look at a really common one here. So this is Shark Blades Vanessa. So if we're playing Shark Blades, generally on our board, we have a lot of small weapons that go along with our Shark Blades. A lot of those are going to be not as powerful as others. Katana is very good, but the revolver is very bad. But we might just be playing the revolver because it's a low cooldown weapon that slots in well when we're playing Shark Claws. However, in Shark Claws, you also are going to be getting Zoracid. And with the Zoracid, you know that you're going to be wanting to get burn items. And with our burn items, we look at something like a volcanic vents that we might just be playing on board so our Zoracid goes off, or we could be finding something like incendiary rounds. Once we have these two items, well, maybe our Shark Blade build, or Shark Claws rather, is not going to scale well past day 12, but we can go and try and invest in something like the powder keg. So again, I pulled up howbazaar.gg here so we can look at the powder keg. It is going to scale well with our burn items. It says whenever you burn, you charge this 2 seconds. So again, we're going to have a lot of those items because we have the Zoracid anyway, and it's going to deal damage equal to 30, 40, or 50% based off its tier of the max HP of our opponents, and we're going to destroy the powder keg. So, Shark Claws, maybe we put our silver tier upgrade on it, maybe we naturally find a gold tier upgrade on it, but when we get to our day 13 upgrade, well, maybe we put that on a powder keg, we get this thing to diamond tier, now we transition out of Shark Claws rather, we put the powder keg on board, and we get some crit chance items. Now we're playing the powder keg, and this is a much, much, much more powerful build into the late game. It's not one that is going to be as consistent in the mid game, so we're probably still playing our Shark Claws build to get here, but we're naturally going to have a lot of items that are going to pivot us nicely into a powder keg build. So if we think about, again, if we're already ahead with our Shark Claws build, we're getting our econ items so that we can aggressively look for weapon shops or medium shops, be rolling a lot so we can find the powder keg and go off from there. So another example here is a one weapon build. So we can see something like a crow's nest, and then we have our cutlass. We also have these spices here that are doubling the damage of our item, and then we have a silencer that's reducing its cooldown. This is all awesome. However, a lot of the builds in the later game are going to have disruption, so we need a way to really turbocharge and do a lot of damage very quickly, and that's where something like the boulder can come in. So we can transition into this boulder build from our one weapon build. So with our one weapon build, maybe we also have something like a flagship. Basically, those items are just not going to do enough in the late game portions of season 2. It really worked well, I would say, in like season 0, like the open beta, and some of season 1. But in season 2, I would say like one weapon builds are just not as powerful as they once were, in my opinion. You might feel differently. But this is why when I play a one weapon build, I'm generally looking to try and transition to something even more powerful once I get to the ultra late game portions of the game. And that's where I'm looking for something like a boulder, which is going to slot in nicely. However, I need the money to do that. So when I'm looking for that late game economy, or I'm trying to build up my economy for the late game so I can aggressively try and find a boulder and then slot it in on my board with the other items. Additionally, you're going to want the economy not just for the one item you're looking for, but also the items that synergize with it. You're keeping yourself open so that you can find something more powerful and get yourself to that 10 wins. Sure, you can lock into a build and maybe you just fully commit to a one weapon build, but I would say to more consistently get 10 wins, a better strategy, in my opinion, is to lean into your one weapon build, but be building up enough economy in the backpack so that you're not out of money when you have the opportunity to transition into something more powerful. If you're always spending money to make minor upgrades to your board or minor upgrades to your items, this can be good, but realistically, what's more powerful is getting a more powerful item. So play for power in the later portions of the game. Now, here's a bigger question mark. What do we do when we're weak? This is something that I see a lot of people asking, and I'll have a build, or rather a video, on how to pivot out of certain builds, but I think the fundamentals are in front of us here. So when we're weak, again, we've used our strength assessment tools to know that we are weak. We're having a really hard time winning fights, and again, utilizing our assessment tools, we know that it's not just a fluke, it's not just that our opponents got lucky, it's like genuinely we are weak. So we are going to aggressively look for power or direction. Generally, if you're weak, it's because you don't have a lot of synergy, or it's because you don't have a build that is going to come together to give you the power that you need into the game. You don't need to play meta builds to win and get 10 wins in the game. However, you do need to have enough synergy on your board to be effective. So we need to aggressively look for power direction. What do I mean by that? Well, we are going to go to merchants. We are going to build up our economy just as we did when we were strong, but we are going to go to merchants, and we're naturally going to have less money because we are winning less, and we are aggressively looking for a powerful item that is going to give us direction. Again, I'll have a video on like what those items are, but this is the overall concept here. With that, we're also playing. If we can't find anything that is powerful, if we're struggling to have the economy in that we need to like aggressively look for a large item that may cost like 12 or 24 gold, what do? Well, we play into the powerful part of our build. So let's say we're a value stacking build. Well, we know we're going to be pretty weak for a large portion of the game because a lot of our slots on our board are specifically dedicated to putting money or value or stat points onto the items in front of us. So they're not directly affecting the fights that we're approaching. I'm thinking of something like a rewards card or a VIP pass at a Pygmalion. These things are not, again, going to be doing anything proactive realistically for the power of us defeating our opponents, but they're going to be helping us scale into later portions of the game. So if you're in this position where you're value stacking something like a money tree, well, you're going to double down on that. Or this is at least one thing that you can do, is double down on that. So you're buying items that are going to enable for better stacking. You're going to say, okay, I know I'm not winning early, but my build is going to be more powerful than everyone else in the late game. I'm going to get a huge money tree. I'm going to find a way to convert that money tree into damage or into ultra healing. And I'm going to find a way to really synergize with this to the point where it's going to win me the game. That's one very viable way to play the game. It's actually one that in season 1 on Pygmalion was maybe the primary way to play the game if you weren't in a freeze build. It's just forfeiting the early game and knowing that you'll be winning the late game. That's how you get your 10 wins. Other things that we can look at is like, okay, I have a lot of max HP and defense in my build, but I'm lacking damage. Well, let's go all in on survivability. This means we're taking off all of the items on our board that may be doing like a little amount of damage here or there, and we're just fully committing to a defensive build. This, I would say, is very risky because a lot of builds are going to be scaling damage, just how the items are in the Bazaar. So it is very difficult to make this work, but it can work, and it can help you get across that threshold to where you find a more powerful item, you find a powerful enchantment or synergy, to help kind of bridge the gap so you're not just bleeding losses in the middle portions of the game. Another thing that we can think about is like, again, if we have a healing build, and we're playing Pygmalion, the example I said before is like getting a kukri or golf clubs, which are going to scale with our healing or regen. Basically, we're taking off all of our small items on board that we're not really contributing a lot of damage. We're going and having at least 8 or 9 slots fully dedicated to defenses or healing, and then we're trying to win through a scaling kukri or golf clubs. This is viable, but it is just generally not as powerful as a lot of the other builds in the Bazaar, in my opinion. And the other big thing is play to your outs. You want to identify items or upgrades that you can get, and then will get you back on track. So we'll look at a couple examples here, and I think this will give you a better understanding. So currently in the Bazaar, I think one of the most popular builds and one of the easiest, I would say, on Pygmalion that you can do is play Showcase. This incentivizes you to have at least 3 weapons or 3 shielding items, but you may not have the damage that you need from those weapons, or your Showcase is a bronze tier, you can't find an upgrade, and you're really bleeding a lot of losses in the middle portion of the game where normally you think you would be powerful at this point, but you just don't have enough resources or you don't have enough of those items to synergize with your Showcase. Well, what are we looking for? We're looking for a drum. If we can get the drum, that is going to allow all of our weapons to do significantly more damage than if we had the Showcase, just because of how the drum works. And this is a huge upgrade for us. So again, we're thinking about, what do I have now? We'll have a bunch of weapons with a Showcase. What works really well with weapons? That's the Jabalion drum. Okay, that's what the item I need to be looking for. Another example is if we're in a freeze build and we're using something like the Steam Ladle. The Steam Ladle is a very powerful item. With our freeze builds, it can be something that can get us all the way to the end game. However, in the end game, the Steam Ladle just might be too slow. So when we're getting to like day 10 or 11, we start to lose, our enchant wasn't very powerful. Okay, we're in a pretty weak spot. What do we need to do? Well, we're looking for something like the Giant Ice Club. This is going to allow our damage to be increased significantly. Again, we're thinking about, what is the build in front of us? What items do we have? And what one item or 2 items would really put our build over the top? Then we're going to aggressively search for those items. I want to also talk about an example of Vanessa. I'm not going to do it for all the heroes, but I'll talk about Vanessa specifically, as I think it's a pretty popular hero, and we're going to see this play pattern a lot, where you're going to have a lot of aquatic items, you're going to maybe have a pufferfish, you're going to have your jellyfish, you're going to be trying to poison out your opponents. However, you're poisoning and you have no defense. Okay, well, let's say we're in the middle portion of the game. If we're poisoning, that could be way, way slower than the burn damage our opponents are doing, or the scaling damage from something like, again, a Shark Claws build or a Showcase build. What do we need? We need defense. That's where we're looking for something like the diving helmet that can help bridge the gap and get us across that threshold of not dying too quickly and allowing our poison damage to really go off. Because let's say our poison is actually very strong. However, we just don't have enough defense. Well, we need to look for defense. That item could completely change our build. And it's something that we could even enchant at level 10, and it can do some really good stuff. Or let's say we have on Vanessa another example where we have a lot of really good haste items. We have a beach ball, we have a Zoracid. These items are going to be providing a lot of different instances of haste, but we don't really have anything good to haste. Well, that's where we can look for something like the Arbalist, or even something like the Shark, I'm blanking on the name, the Shark Ray, there you go. Items that are going to scale damage based off the instances of haste that we do. And then if we can know that we're looking for a medium item, we're looking for a weapon, we're looking for an ammo item, we can go and aggressively try and find this item in our shops, and that could completely transform our run from being something mediocre to something very, very strong. And that's it, y'all. That's how we look at our strength. That's what we utilize with this knowledge here. If you all have any specific questions, feel free to put those down in the comments section. And hey, if you guys have a lot of specific questions on any one portion of what we're doing or want some more in-depth knowledge, I'm happy to make another video. This actually came from a poll that I put out, basically asking people what they wanted to see. And a lot of them said that they wanted to see how we assess our strength, so I made this video. So if you have other video ideas that you want me to put out there into the ether, I'm more than happy to do so, and frankly just love the fact that you all are trying to learn and be better at the game. So with this, just wrapping up here, so we talked about our strength assessments. Again, we have that monster test. If we can defeat that strongest monster for that day. That's going to give us a decent understanding of where we're at strength-wise in our build. This is really all also based off the win speed idea here. If we can win in under 5 seconds, we're very strong. If we're winning before that 10 to 12 second mark, we are strong. If we're winning by the 20-second mark, well, we're kind of in that middle point and need to figure something out. And then everything from there is weak territory. We need to figure out what to do then. And then if we're in doubt where we don't really know where we're at, we break out the DPS calculator, we put in the numbers, we crunch them, we figure out what we need to do to be better. We talked about what we do when we're strong. We secure our lead and we look for a late game build that is going to allow us to get to that 10 win portion. It doesn't always mean that we have to pivot to another build, but we're looking for the items that are going to ensure that we get to 10 wins when we have the opportunity to either put an enchant on it or when we find the right items to slot them into our board. And what do we do when we're weak? Well, we search for direction. If we're missing a piece, we're trying to search for that missing piece. We're aggressively looking through our shops to find something to make our board better, but we need the money to do it. So we're also taking the econ items alongside it. Generally, the more like burst economy items than the trickle economy items. Those are going to be better for us, or we're taking events that are going to be giving us spare change and stuff like that. If all that doesn't work out, we play to our strengths. We're doubling down on the strategy and saying to ourselves, okay, we may not be winning now, but in 3 or 4 days, or maybe with one item upgrade, we're going to be in a really good spot. And then lastly, if nothing's working out for us, if we get to the point where our build really starts to plateau, that's where we need to pivot to something else. And with all this said, I appreciate you watching. I'm the Bazaar Whisperer. This is Bazaar Overexplained, and I can't help myself from over-explaining, even though I said this would be a short video, but I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.